Kuznetsky Most was an inhabited station. About 50 meters before the entrance, in the middle of the path, there stood a sturdy checkpoint. It was only one checkpoint, but it had a searchlight, though it was turned off at the moment, since it wasn't needed, and it was equipped with a machine gun. He was eating some kind of mash from a beaten-up soldier's bowl. There were yet another couple of people in the same outfit, with clumsy-looking army machine guns on their shoulders, who nitpickingly checked the documents of those who were coming out of the tunnel. There was a small line in front of them, all the fugitives who had come from Kitai-Gorod, who had overtaken Artyom while he had walked slowly with Mikhail Porfirovich and Vanichka. The people were slowly and reluctantly admitted. One guy had been rejected, and he was now sitting in dismay, not knowing what to do, and trying from time to time to approach the checkpoint guards, who pushed him off each time and called up the next person in line. Each of the arriving people was thoroughly searched, and they saw for themselves how a man on whom they'd found an undeclared Makarov pistol was thrown out of the line, and when he tried to argue with them, they tied him up and led him away. Artyom felt a twirling inside, sensing that trouble was ahead. Mikhail Porfirovich was looking at him in surprise, and Artyom quietly whispered that he was armed, but the man just nodded reassuringly and promised him that everything would be all right. It wasn't that Artyom trusted him, but thought that it would be very interesting to see how he intended to settle the matter. The old man merely smiled mysteriously. Slowly, their turn approached. The border guards were now gutting the insides of some 50-year-old woman's coat, while she took to accusing them of being tyrants and expressing surprise that people such as them could exist. Artyom agreed with her, but he decided not to voice his solidarity audibly. Digging around the guard with a satisfied whistle, took several grenades from her dirty brassiere and looked for an explanation. Artyom was sure that the woman would now tell a touching story about her grandson who needed these things for his work. You see, he works as a welder, and this is part of his welding equipment. Or she'd say that she found these grenades along the road, and she was, as it happens, rushing to give them to the relevant authorities. But, taking a couple of steps backwards, she hissed a curse and rushed back into the tunnel, hurrying to hide in the darkness. The machine gunner set aside his bowl of food and gripped his unit, but one of the other border guards, apparently the older one, stopped him with a gesture. The fat one sighed in disappointment, turned back to his prodigy, and Mikhail Porfirovich took a step forward, holding his passport at the ready. It was amazing, but the senior guard, without the slightest twinge of conscience, having upturned the whole bag belonging to the completely offensive-looking woman, quickly leaped through the old man's notebook, and he didn't pay a jot of attention to Vanichka, as though he wasn't there. It was Artyom's turn. He readily gave his documents over to the lean-mustached guard, and the man started meticulously scrutinizing each page of them, and shined his torch on his stamps for an especially long time. The border guard compared Artyom's physiology no less than 5 times against the photograph, outwardly expressing his doubts, while Artyom gave a friendly smile, trying to portray himself as innocence itself. "Why is your passport a Soviet model?" the guard finally asked with a stern voice, not knowing what else to pick on. I was little, see, when there were still real ones, and then our administration corrected the situation with the first form they could find to fill in. That's out of order, the man frowned. Open your rucksack. If he detects the machine gun, Artyom thought, then he could run back, otherwise they would confiscate it. He wiped perspiration from his forehead. Mikhail Porfirovich went up to the guard and stood very close to him and whispered quickly. Konstantin Alexeyevich, you understand, this young man is my friend. He is a very, very decent youth. I can guarantee it personally. The border guard opened Artyom's bag and pushed his hand inside it. Artyom went cold. Then the guard said dryly, 5. And while Artyom figured out what he meant, the old man pulled a fistful of cartridges out of his pocket and quickly counted out 5. Put them into the half-open field bag that was hanging off the guard's belt. But Konstantin Alexeyevich's hand had continued its rummaging in Artyom's bag, and apparently the worst had happened, because his face took on a sudden interested expression. Artyom felt his heart falling into a precipice, and he shut his eyes. 15, the guard said impassively. After nodding, Artyom counted off 10 additional cartridges and poured them into the same bag. Not one muscle flickered on the face of the border guard. He simply took a step to the side, and the path to Kuznetsky Most was free and clear. With admiration for the man's iron restraint, Artyom went forward. The next 15 minutes were spent squabbling with Mikhail Porfirovich, who stubbornly refused to accept 5 cartridges from Artyom, assuring him that his debt to Artyom was much greater. Kuznetsky Most was no different from most of the other stations that Artyom had managed to see on his journey so far. It had the same marble on the walls and granite on the floors, but the arches here were unusually high and wide, creating an unusual sensation of spaciousness. But the most surprising thing was that on each of the tracks stood entire trains that were incredibly long, so enormous that they took up almost all the room at the station. The windows were lit up with a warm light that shone through various colored curtains, and the doors were welcomingly opened. Artyom had not seen anything like it. Yes, he had half-erased memories of swiftly moving and hooting trains with bright squares of windows. The memories were from his early childhood, but they were diffuse, ephemeral, like the other thoughts about what had gone before. As soon as he tried to remember any details, to focus on something small, then the elusive image dissolved right away and flowed like water through his fingers. There was nothing left. But since he had grown up, he had only seen the train that had got stuck in the tunnel entrance at Rezskaya, and some wagons at Kitay Gorod and Prospect Mir. Artyom froze on the spot, captivated, looking at the train, counting the carriages that melted into the haze of the other end of the platform, near the entrance to the Red Line. There, a red calico banner hung down from the ceiling, snatched from the darkness by a distinct circle of electric light, and underneath it stood 2 machine gunners in identical green uniforms and peaked caps, who seemed small from far away and amusingly reminiscent of toy soldiers. Artyom had 3 toy soldiers like them when he lived with his mother. One was the commander with a tiny pistol pulled out of its holster. He was yelling something, looking backwards. He was probably ordering his group to follow him into battle. The other 2 stood straight, holding their machine guns. The little soldiers were probably from different collections. There was no way to play with them. The commander was throwing himself into battle, and despite his valiant cries, the other 2 were standing in place. Just like the border guards of the Red Line, they weren't particularly heading for battle. It was strange. He remembered these soldiers so well, Yeah, he couldn't remember his mother's face. Kuznetsky most was relatively orderly. The light here, like at BDNKH, came from emergency lights that were strung along the length of the ceilings on some kind of mysterious metal construction that had perhaps once illuminated the station itself. Apart from the trains, there was absolutely nothing remarkable about the station. I've heard so often that there are so many amazingly beautiful places in the metro, but from what I can see, they're almost all identical. Artyom shared his disappointment with Mikhail Porfirovich. Come now, young man. There are such beautiful places you wouldn't believe. There's Komsomolovskaya on the ring, a veritable palace. The old man heatedly took to persuading him. There's an enormous panel there, on the ceiling. It has linen on it and other rubbish. It's true. Oh, what am I saying? He stopped short and, with a whisper, said to Artyom, "This station is full of secret agents from the Sokolnicheskaya line. That's to say, the Red Line. Sorry, I call this by their old name. I call things by their old names. So you have to be quiet here. The local leadership look like it's independent, but they don't want to quarrel with the Reds. So if they ask them to hand someone over, then they can just hand you over. Not to mention the murders," he added very quietly, looking timidly from side to side. "Come on, let's find somewhere to rest. To be honest, I'm terribly tired, and indeed you, in my opinion, are only barely managing to stay on your feet. Let's spend the night here, and then we'll go on." Artyom nodded. The day had indeed seemed to be endless and stressful, and rest was absolutely necessary. Enviously sighed, and not taking his eyes off the train, Artyom followed Mikhail Porfirovich. There was joyful laughter and conversation coming from the carriages, and they passed a man standing on the doorway. He looked tired after a day's work and was smoking a cigarette with his neighbor, calmly discussing the events of the day. Gathered around a table, old ladies were drinking tea under a small lamp that was hanging from a wire. Children were running wild. This seemed unusual to Artyom. At BDNKH, the conditions were always very tense, and people were ready for anything to happen. Yes, people got together in the evenings to sit quietly with friends in someone's tent, but there was nothing like this, where doors were open in full view, and people were visiting each other so easily, children everywhere. This station was just too happy. And what do they live here? Artyom couldn't contain himself as he caught up with the old man. "What? You don't know?" Mikhail Porfirovich said politely, but he was surprised. "This is Kuznetsky most. You get the best technicians in the metro here, important masters. They bring all sorts of devices to fix here for the Sokolnicheskaya line, even from the ring itself. They're flourishing. What it would be like to live here," he sighed, dreaming. "But they're very strict about that." Artyom hoped in vain that they would also be able to sleep in one of the railroad cars on a bed. In the middle of the hall stood a row of big tents, the kind that they lived in at BDNKH, and the first one they came to had a stenciled inscription on it that said "Hotel." Next to it was a whole line of fugitives, but Mikhail Porfirovich, calling one of the organizers to the side, tinkled some copper and whispered something magical, starting with Konstantin Alexeyevich, and the matter was settled. "We'll go here," he said, with an inviting gesture, and Vanechka joyfully gurgled. They even gave them some tea there, and he didn't have to pay anything extra for it. and the mattresses on the floor were so soft that after you'd fallen on them, you really didn't want to have to get up. Half reclining, Artyom carefully blew on the mug of tea and attentively listened to the old man, who was telling him something with a burning look, having forgotten about his cup of tea. They have power across the whole branch, and no one will tell you about that, and the Reds will never admit to it. But university is not under their control. And everything beyond university, too. Yes, the red line continues to Sportivnaya. There's a passage that starts there, which was once the station Leninskaya Gory, and then they changed the name, but I can only remember the old one. But Leninskaya Gory was below the bridge, actually. And you see, there was an explosion on the bridge, and it collapsed into the river. The station was flooded. So there hasn't been any communication with university from the very beginning. Artyom swallowed a little gulp of tea and felt that everything inside was sweetly freezing in place in anticipation of something mysterious, unusual, that something had started back where the broken rails hovered over a precipice on the red line, down in the southwest. Penechka was gnawing on his nails, only stopping sometimes to look with satisfaction at the fruits of his labor and then starting up again. Artyom looked at him almost with sympathy, felt grateful to the boy that he was being quiet. We have a small circle at Barricadnaya. Mikhail Porfirovich smiled embarrassedly. And we get together in the evenings. Sometimes people come to us from Ulitsa, 1905, and now they chased all the differently thinking people. And Anton Petrovich moved to our station too. It's nonsense, of course. These are simple literary gatherings, but we sometimes talk about politics. They don't especially like educated people at Barricadnaya either, so we just do it on the quiet. But Yakov Yosifovich was saying that, allegedly, University Station didn't perish, that they managed to block off the tunnel, and there's still people there now. Not just people, but, you understand, that's where Moscow University used to be. That's why the station is called University. And so, allegedly, some of the professoriate were saved at University Station, and some students too. There was some kind of bomb shelter under the university, something constructed by Stalin, and I think they were connected by the tunnel, or special tunnels to the metro. And now there's another kind of intellectual center there, But that's probably just legend. That there's educated people in power there, and all the 3 stations and the shelter are governed by a rector, and each station is headed by a deacon, all elected for a specified term. Their studies aren't at a standstill. There are still students, postgrads, teachers, and culture hasn't died out. Not like it has here. They write things, and they haven't forgotten how to conduct research. And Anton Petrovich even said that one of his friends, an engineer, told him in secret that they'd even found a way to go to the surface. They created a protective suit, and sometimes their scouts are sent into the metro. You'll agree that it sounds improbable. Mikhail Porfirovich added, half-questioningly, looking Artyom in the eye, and Artyom noticed something sad in his eyes, a timid and tired hope that made Artyom cough a little and answer as confidently as possible. Why, it sounds completely possible. Take Polis, for example. I heard the same about it. Yes, it's a wonderful place, Polis. But how can you get there these days? They told me that at the council, the power has been taken by the military. Which council? Artyom raised his eyebrows. What? Polis is governed by a council of the most authoritative people. And there, you know, authoritative people are either librarians or servicemen. But I don't really know about Biblioteca Lenina exactly, so there's no point in talking about it. But the other entrance to Polis is located right behind the Ministry of Defense, as far as I remember. Or, in any case, it was somewhere nearby, and some of the generals were able to evacuate to it at the time. At the very beginning, the military men took power, and this junta ruled Polis for a sufficiently long time. But the people didn't really like them ruling there. Was disorder of the blood-spilling kind. But that was a long time ago. A long time before the war with the Reds. Then they came to a compromise, and this council was founded. And it happened that within it there were two factions, the librarians and the servicemen. It was a strange combination, of course. You know, the military had probably not met many librarians in their lives, and here they were together. And between these factions there was an eternal fight, of course. One would take control, then the other. When the war started with the Reds, defense was more important than culture, and the scales tipped to the generals. Then peaceful times began, and again the librarians gained influence. And it's like a pendulum there. Now, I hear that the military people have a stronger position, and they're imposing discipline there, you know, curfews and all those other joys of life. Mikhail Porfirovich quietly smiled. Going through there isn't any easier than getting to the Emerald City. That's what we call university among ourselves, and the stations surrounding it, for a joke. You have to go either through the Red Line or through the hospital, but you can't just go there. As you yourself understand, before the fascists, you could go through Pushkinskaya to Chekhovskaya, and then it's just one transfer to Borovitskaya. It's not a good transfer, of course, but when I was younger, I made my way through it. Artyom asked what was so bad about the transfer he mentioned, and the old man reluctantly answered. You understand, right there in the middle of the tunnel there's a burnt-out train. I haven't been there in ages, so I don't know how it is now, but before you could see charred human remains sitting in its seats. It was just terrible. I don't know how this happened, and I asked some friends, but no one has been able to say exactly. And it's very hard to get through this train because the tunnel has started to collapse and dirt has filled in all the spaces around the train. In the train itself, in the carriages, I mean, various bad things are going on, and it would be difficult to explain it. I'm an atheist in general, you know, and I don't believe in all that mystical nonsense. And now I don't believe in anything anymore. Those words led Artyom to the gloomy memories of the noise in the tunnel and on his line, and he couldn't restrain himself, and he told the old man what had happened to his group, then what happened to Gerber, and, after hesitating a little bit, he tried to repeat the explanation that Khan had given him. What? What are you talking about? That's utter rubbish, Mikhail Porfirovich brushed him off, sternly knitting his brow. I've already heard about such things. You remember I was telling you about Yakov Osifovich? Well, he's a physicist, and he explained to me that these disruptions to the psyche occur when people are subjected to the lowest frequencies of sound. They are essentially inaudible. If I'm not mistaken, it's around 7 hertz, but then my mind is like a sieve, and this sound can, but then my mind is like a sieve, And this sound can come about by itself as a result of natural process. For example, from tectonic shifts and things like that. I wasn't listening very attentively as he told me about it, but that it was something to do with souls of the dead in the pipes, please. This old man was interesting. Artyom heard things from him that he had never heard from anyone else. The man saw the metro from a different angle, an old-fashioned, an amusing one, and everything apparently pulled his soul to the surface of the earth. He was clearly very uncomfortable here, as though these were his first days underground. And Artyom, thinking of the argument between Sequoia and Hunter, asked him, "And what do you think? Will we ever return to the surface? Will we survive and go back?" And he immediately regretted asking it, because it was as though the question had cut into the old man's very veins, and he became soft straight away and said, quietly, with a lifeless voice, I don't think so. But after all, there were other metro systems in Petersburg, in Minsk, and in Novgorod. Artyom listed the names he had learned by heart. They had always been empty shells of words. Ah, what a beautiful city, Petersburg. Mikhail Porfirovich didn't answer him, but sadly sighed. You know, Isaacs, or Admiral Kistevo, is the spire there? What grace. And evenings on Nevsky Prospect. People, noise, crowds, laughter, children with ice cream, pretty girls, music playing. In summer especially. It's rarely good weather in the summer there, but when it happens, the sun, the sky is clear, azure. And then, it's just easy to breathe again. His eyes fixed on Artyom, but his gaze was going right through the young man and dissolved in the ethereal distance, where translucent, majestic silhouettes of the dusty buildings rose from the dusky smoke, giving Artyom the impression that he could have turned around and seen it for himself. The old man went quiet, heaved a deep sigh, and Artyom decided not to interrupt his reminiscence. Yes, there were indeed other metro systems apart from Moscow's. Maybe people took refuge there and saved themselves. But think about it, young man. Mikhail Porfirovich raised a naughty finger in the air. How many years have gone by and nothing? Surely they would have found us after all these years if they had been looking for us. No, he dropped his head. I don't think